Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, my name's Amy Morris. I'm one of the librarians with Pima County Public Library here in Tucson, and we're here at the Tucson Festival of Books.
Wonderful. Mm-hmm.
And this is the Amphitheater High School group who will be interviewing you.
Hi.
Hi, it's a pleasure to meet you. So I will start off by saying my name is Gael or G, depending which is easier to pronounce. But I'm here today to introduce us. We are the Amphi Book Club, as you can say. And we're thankful that you have given us the opportunity to interview you today on behalf of our supporters of the Amphitheater High School, the Miss Amy Morris, and our librarian, Ms. Burleson. So thank you very much for letting us interview you.
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I was just exhausted. I'm not used to traveling this much. So I'm giving myself a break, a rest in these troubled times. So I'm looking forward to your questions, and I'll answer them the best that I can.
All right, thank you.
Thank you again for being here, Ms. Zoboi. The first question I have is, in the book, you paint a detailed picture of Brownsville and the residents of the people that live there. My question is there any influence from you growing up in Bushwick that influenced in the book?
Absolutely. And I also lived for about 2 years in the neighborhood of Brownsville. And I wanted to set it in Brownsville because instead of Bushwick, because Bushwick is gentrified now. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it looks like in Arizona, but gentrification in New York City looks like where a bodega used to be. And a bodega is a corner store. There would probably be a nice coffee shop. So Bushwick, when I was growing up, there were a lot of burnt down and dilapidated buildings. And it was during the war on drugs, where there were a lot of people who were addicted to drugs, and it was treated as criminal. It was treated as a crime instead of an illness. And what's happening in the book in Brownsville with Pyroblist, I am making a connection to the war on drugs and what people did to their communities because they were not well, not because they wanted to destroy their communities, because they were addicted to a substance and it was criminalized. And I wanted to make a sort of commentary on the fact that we put blame on the victims and not usually the people who caused those neighborhoods to be damaged in that way. So absolutely, Brownsville was definitely based on my childhood in Bushwick, but I didn't want to set it in Bushwick because Bushwick has already changed. Brownsville has not been gentrified. It's in the process of being changed. So it's almost there, but not there. And I hope the people who live there can hold on to their communities.
Hi, my name is Shireen, and recently I've read one of your books called American Street, and there's like a lot of rational discrimination and immigration and family separation in that book, and Fallon went through a lot. And how are Fallon and Okoye similar?
Oh, wow, they are similar. Thank you for pointing that out. Fabiola is a fish out of water, meaning, her home, her safety was in Haiti. And just like Okoye's home was in Wakanda. So she arrives to the United States and sees a neighborhood that is in need of help. Just like Fabiola moved to the west side of Detroit. She didn't know how to help the neighborhood, but she had family members who lived there and they were in need of help as well. So they are very, very similar. Fabiola is tough and she's a fighter, but not quite like Adora Milaje. But Okoye, of course, is tough and is a fighter, but she has to have empathy. She has to grow into her empathy in the way that Fabiola had to grow into being like a fighter and a warrior in order to try to get her mother out of the detention center. So thank you for pointing that out.
Hi, my name is Monaho. You and I are kind of similar because we both grew up, we were both born out of the US. I was born in Sudan and you were born in Haiti. My question for you is, what kind of life did you have in the US after you came here?
What kind of, I missed that. What did you say? What kind of
life?
Life?
In the US, yes, after you came here.
So I came here when I was very young. I was 4 years old. I heard you. Thank you so much. I was 4 years old. So I was younger than you were, but I still feel like I still haven't really been Americanized. I'm still very much an outsider in many ways because I'm still connected to my culture. So life for me was very tough growing up because I wasn't allowed to do things like play outside with the kids in my neighborhood because my mother wanted to protect me. And she did not like what she thought some of the kids were doing. And American culture was something still very foreign to her. So she didn't want me to be assimilated. She wanted me to get an American education, but not be like an American teen because she had all these stereotypes in her mind about what being an American teen is like. So I still find it hard to be fully Americanized, even as an adult. So even my children find it hard to, because I still cook my cultural foods. Our home looks like it's filled with a lot of culture. So we're kind of balancing two worlds in the way that many of you are if your parents are from a different culture. Thank you for that question. Good question.
All right. Hi, my name is Luam. I would like to ask you, why did you choose Okoye over more prominent characters in the Black Panther?
I think Okoye is a prominent character. King T'Challa and T'Chaka are cool. Shuri is cool, but Okoye deserves her own story. And Okoye is actually about 18 or 19 in the book. So she's a teenager, and Tree and Mars are a little younger than her. So I think she's an important character, and she's the one that I most relate to. I relate to Shuri as well. So I really, really wanted to write about Okoye.
Hello, my name is Shada. It's a pleasure to meet you. And as someone who is trying to write a story of their own, how do you write characters with such synergy? For example, Okoye and Captain Anaka.
So I have had a lot of practice. I have been writing since before I was your age, since before high school. And it doesn't mean that I got published. It means that I've been practicing. The best way that you can practice in writing about characters is to journal. Write to yourself. You're not writing to yourself a story or anything like that. You're writing to get a sense of your own voice. You're developing your voice. So I hope some of you have tried journaling already, and of course you're writing for school. But when you're writing to yourself and nobody is grading you or nobody's looking over your shoulder, you get to see whether you are snarky, whether you are witty, whether you're funny. What is the voice that you use when you're talking to yourself? And that is a good way to figure out your character. And when you figure that out, you can apply it to other characters when you're making up people. You get to practice voice. So I do encourage you, if you want to become a writer, or if you just want to let your feelings out sometimes, to journal, not on social media, but on pen and paper. And if you're worried about someone seeing it, sometimes you can write something on a piece of paper, tear it up and throw it away just to get it out of your head.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Freba. Would you like this book to become a movie? And if this book becomes a movie, would Stella Adams, the villain, get away in the end, or would you give it a different ending?
Oh, that's a good question. First of all, if it became a movie, it would belong to Marvel, right? Because Marvel has copyright, meaning this is their character, and I just get to play in their world. If it does become a movie, I would be really excited because that means that Brownsville, a real neighborhood, people would get to see a neighborhood like Brownsville have a real villain. So I don't know, because script writing is very different. Script writing for a movie is not like novel writing. So I don't know what I would change about the ending, because it's a different way of writing when you're writing for a movie. You have to show people what the characters are doing instead of just writing about their feelings sometimes. So I think I would keep the ending the same.
Okay. Thank you. And for my very first question, so as I read into the book, your book isn't really much of a superhero book. It more drives onto a realistic fiction of this book. And I wanted to ask, what made you want to write it that way?
So I am really not into comic books. There are kids. My son is a high school student. My husband he's a high school teacher. So I have comic books in the home, but I wanted to get to the heart of a character. Sometimes we think of warriors as like, they're always fighting to try to save the day, and we don't get a sense of what the social justice issues are. So it's just it's just the type of writer I am. I'm like a poet, and I wanted to give the story heart. I think maybe somebody else who writes about Okoye, it could be a different kind of story. So it's just a matter of what kind of writer I am, and it's the voice that I use when I'm writing my stories. Thank you for that question. That's a good one.
Thank you.
For my second question, in chapter 4, the king's entourage arrives in Brownsville for the ceremony to reveal it, and they are met with degrading racial slurs. My question is, how do we rise above racism, or how do we rise above being called racial slurs?
That's a good observation and question. So I want to point out that everybody in the book, except for Stella Adams and some of the members of No Nation Left Behind, everybody is Black. But when the Wakanda visitors come to Brownsville, there's intra-racial slurs, right? So what does it mean when the people look like you throw racial slurs at you? It's the best answer I have for that is to learn about other people. Unfortunately, the kids in Brownsville had never seen people like Wakanda before. And it's like when you meet, people who look like you in America, but because you're coming from a different country, they think they're better than you. So it's all a matter of learning about someone's other culture and having empathy and realizing like they're just like you, right? They have the same family values, or their family looks like you, or maybe you eat the same kind of foods, just prepared very differently. I think we can all learn from each other, and it's to really, really understand each other and where they come from. So to me, looking at you, I would never know that you are in Arizona unless you told me, right? Of course, I can't see outside. But based on who I'm seeing, you could be down the block, right? You could be in New York City. You could be in almost any state here, especially if you're wearing hoodies or sweatshirts. I would never know that you are in Arizona because, one, I've never been to Arizona. That would have been my first time if I was there. And two, I have an idea of who people, I think I have an idea of who lives in Arizona, and I'm wrong about that idea. So this is very wrong, right? So this is a learning moment for me. I'm learning from this too. Thank you.
How was your writing process different from writing Okoye to the People compared to writing American Street?
Very, very hard. This was the hardest book to write, even though it's not hard to read, right? So it's hard to write because Okoye is very active. I am not very active. The fighting scenes and Okoye using her spear were the hardest to write because it's called stage direction on the page. So if she's throwing something, I have to describe her throwing something. I have to show you that she's throwing instead of just telling you that she throws it. And there's a scene where the spear lands on a fire hydrant or something, and I couldn't figure out how would she stop the fire, right? Using her spear. And my editors at Marvel kept editing me and saying the vibranium spear, the spear is not made from wood, it's vibranium. So I'm like, oh, it's magic. They're like, no, it's not magic, it's science. So the hard thing for me is I had stereotypes too, because I know the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Of course, I've seen the Black Panther movies and I've read the comic books, but because when people usually write about Africa or even the Caribbean and they have powers, it's usually magical powers. And those powers are based on magic or things that you cannot scientifically explain. So I kept thinking like the vibranium spear is a magic, the Kamoya beads are magic. And they're telling me like, no, it is science. The Kamoya beads are like, can be like a cell phone, right? And I'm like, oh, okay. I kept having to remember that Wakanda's powers are not based on magic. They're based on science because of the vibranium. And there's physics and chemistry involved in that. So that was the hardest part about writing it. Versus American Street had magical realism. There is a magical figure, not a magical, just a man that's based on Haitian mythology, standing at the crossroads. And I was relying on mythology. Wakanda is not mythology. It is kind of sort of, it's Marvel, it's MCU, it's superhero, but there's no magic. There's no magic potions. There's no superstitions. There are no magical creatures. It's all science.
So towards the end of your book, it tells us how the king was being used by Stella. What I want to know is, do you have any way to tell if someone is being used or any specific advice?
Oh, that's a good question. How do you tell? The way you can tell you're being used is that it's not reciprocated. Reciprocated means when you're giving and someone is not returning, then you're being used. And you have to feel someone giving back to you the same energy, right? I want to know that, let's say I'm writing this book for Marvel and I don't want to feel used by Marvel, right? That they're using my ideas. But then again, I could reciprocate that by having me talk to teens about it, right? And making sure that I talk to the right people instead of just like making it a cool, flashy thing. So I need reciprocity in my interactions. And the way you know that is reciprocal is that you give a little and they give a little, right? You give a lot, they give a lot. And you have to see it and feel it. So, let me connect that back to Stella. So with Stella and King T'Chaka, he was there on a humanitarian mission and she needed him to let other people know that she helps his country or she can help poor people. And he needed her for access to just being out of the country, to let the world know that they're just a regular country, a poor, struggling nation who is trying really hard to do the right thing. So it was like a reciprocal relationship in the beginning, but she was using him more than he was using her, because she was using Brownsville and the people to erase them and build her condo buildings. Did you get that? I spoiled it for you. I hope you got to the end.
So, what keeps you inspired to write during the pandemic?
Oh man, that was so hard. There was nothing else to do. And I was traveling a lot before the pandemic. And I wasn't traveling anymore, and I had more time to write about the ideas that I wanted to write about. It was hard writing Okoye to the people during the pandemic for a lot of reasons, because it was a lot of work to figure out the world of Wakanda. I'm going to tell you a secret. You want to hear a secret about Wakanda and Marvel? So I can't use the stuff that's in the movie because it belongs to MCU and Ryan Coogler, who directed Black Panther, the movie. So a lot of the stuff that you see in Black Panther, the movie, it was his idea. So that's called intellectual property. Like when you come up with an idea, you probably see sometimes a little C with the circle around it. That's a copyright. That's your intellectual idea and somebody can't take it. So I couldn't use some of the stuff that was in the movie in my book, which is why Okoye is young. The story takes place several years before Wakanda, the movie. So that's very interesting, right? The most valuable thing that you have as a human being is your intellectual property and your creative property. When you have an idea, like hold on to it and follow through with it. So when Ryan Coogler wrote those scenes, he made sure that it belonged to him and Marvel could not use it somewhere else. So I could not use the purple heart-shaped herb belongs to Marvel. The vibranium belongs to Marvel because it was in the comic books. Okoye belongs to Marvel and Stan Lee. But let's see, a lot of the things that happened. I couldn't write about Okoye being a little girl. I think we're going to see that in Black Panther 2 or something. So when he uses it, it belongs to him. So do you understand what I mean? Yeah. I had to come up with new things that were not part of the movie, so I'm not biting off of his ideas.
All right, thank you.
My other question is, if you weren't an author, what would you be?
I would have been a dancer or a judge on a dance show. But I think I was always meant to be an author, or I would have been a journalist. I would have definitely been a journalist.
Okay, thank you.
What would you always want to talk about in an interview but never get to?
What do I always want to talk about but never get to?
Yeah.
I want to talk about the future. I want to write about, I wish dystopian was still around. I want to write a dystopian novel. So I want to write a book about what the future will look like 50 years from now. So I hope I get to do that.
Well, for my question, I just had it. So in the book, you hint and kind of throw like little, a bit of culture inspiration. So in the book, do you throw in a little bit of your like own Haitian culture into the book?
Oh, wow. So no, because it's all Marvel and Wakanda. I certainly did in American Street. So I threw in a lot of my what I witnessed growing up in New York City. So let me tell you a little bit about Haitian culture. Haitians come from a people who are called Dahomey or Fon, Fon, and the Dora Milaje are based on what was called the Amazon Dahomey warriors, all female warriors. So I am tangibly connected to that history. So that's why I decided to write the book based on the Dora Milaje, because Haitian Africans who were brought to Haiti were from the Dahomey and Fon region. And the warriors, if you look it up, the Wakanda warriors are based on the female army from that part of West Africa. So that's how it's sort of connected.
Thank you.
My other question is about Pyroblist. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Is like it makes people like have pyrokinetic powers. My question is why is the fire so beautiful? Is that a symbol of anything or?
So that is sometimes when you take harmful substances, the euphoria that comes with it, the good feelings are harmful, right? So that is a metaphor for fire being destructive. But when you're under the influence of pyroblist, something destructive becomes beautiful, or else it's not addictive, right? So in manufacturing, that substance, you have to ensure that it's going to have the effect that you want it to do. So to me, I'm remembering the drug epidemic when I was in elementary school. I was very young, but it still continued in the 90s, which was the crack epidemic. And there are people who did it. People were addicted because it made them feel good. They got a high and they kept chasing that high. If it didn't feel good, they wouldn't want to do it, right? And when they feel good, they wanted the next high. So they'll do terrible things to get that next high. Of course, they couldn't work while they were addicted. So they stole things and did terrible things. So that's a disease. So under the influence of pyroblist, you are sick, right? You are incapacitated. You don't have like your mental, like yourself. You don't have your ability to differentiate between right or wrong. So that's why the flames are beautiful. And when they're beautiful, you're going to want to destroy everything. And that was what the villain wanted. Thank you.
Thank you.
What inspired you to start writing?
Because as an immigrant, I just had to find a way to make sense of the world around me. The world was very different. I felt very different and sometimes like an outcast. So I started journaling and telling stories to myself to make sense of the world.
What difficulties did you have writing your very first book?
The difficulties, so the first book that I published, or my very first book was in college, and it wasn't difficult at all, even though I didn't know what I was doing. It wasn't difficult because I didn't know what I was doing and I wasn't following any rules. So my first published novel, the difficulty in publishing that was being afraid that people wouldn't understand my story. Never mind whether or not they liked it. I just did not want them to misunderstand what I was trying to say. But things got easier once I stopped worrying about what other people thought. So it's become easier to write because I write what I want to write about, and I write with the goal that there'll be some young person who can connect and understand my story. out there in the world. It doesn't have to be everybody. It could even just be one person. Okay, maybe not one person. It could be several young people. And I'm glad that several young people find my stories valuable. They don't have to be a blockbuster hit. I know what I can write to write a blockbuster hit, but that's not who I am.
So what's your next plan for your next book?
So my next book right after this comes out next year. It is called Nigeria Jones, and it's about a girl whose father is a radical separatist leader. And she learns to defend herself because her father tells her it's her constitutional right. And she doesn't go to school. She's homeschooled, but because her father is so strict, she feels like she's stifled. So she leaves the organization to go to school and find her own way. And I write that story to let people know that everybody has parents that they don't agree with. And what happens when your parents want the best for you in a very radical way, but you want to find out what the world is all about. So, yep, that's in winter 2023. It's a big book. I quote the Constitution and the founding fathers because it's all about finding freedom, both personal and on the national level. There's a lot of nuggets in there that you probably don't know about American history that I put in there. So I'm really excited about that and hope, and if you're still in high school next year, to look out for it, even if you're in college. What grade is everybody in?
I'm a junior.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a junior also.
Junior as well.
Freshman.
Cool. So at home, I have a freshman and high school senior, and a college sophomore. And my husband is a high school art teacher. So we know teens very well. And I know it's been such a tough 2 years for you all. You are so incredibly strong. But when I tell like my kids that, they tell me, well, you had crack and AIDS, so we're okay. Have you learned about the crack epidemic? No, right? Okay. That's interesting because in about 25 years, there'll be kids who didn't learn about the coronavirus. Yeah. So ask your teachers or your family members. I think it was global too, the crack epidemic and the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Mm-hmm. That's what I grew up in. Mm-hmm. Are the teachers still in the room? Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Do you guys remember crack and AIDS?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So, it was bad, but my kids think it was worse than what they had.
Yeah. Well, I think that these guys, Tucson has a pretty prominent methamphetamine problem. Okay. So think of it like that. And, opioids addiction. And it was just, everything was always somehow led back to crack in the 80s. Don't do crack.
Well, it was different because we had teachers and cops calling into our classrooms to say, just say no. Mm-hmm. And we had the president's wife getting on television to tell us, don't say no to drugs. So that's what my kids saw. They were like, it was that bad that the president had to tell you to say no to drugs in elementary school. Mm-hmm. So that's why they think it was really bad. So good job, you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I hope you're going to see the festival.
Yes.
Ooh, tell her what you did yesterday.
Oh, we got to interview some of the other authors on a panel yesterday, and then we sat down and kind of had a discussion of how to become authors and how to pretty much find yourself and find your words of how you want to write or stuff like that.
Find your voice.
Pretty much.
Okay, great.
Any other questions you guys want to get in at the end here?
No, not really.
No.
All right. But really great questions. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye, thank you.